This is the Mindset Game podcast, and today's guest I've got Barnett. She's one of Oprah Winfrey's Super Soul 100 coaches, and she's also a writer, speaker, and wisdom keeper. Her quote she likes to use is, "My purpose is to help people realize how powerful and unique we all can we truly are." So thanks for coming on the show, Jordana.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here today.
So you talk about in your book, hashtag truth, know your truth, about as a youngster you were in a psychology kind of term, an introvert. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Well, I wasn't an introvert, but most people thought I was an introvert because I didn't speak so much. I didn't say so much. When we had guests over at our house, I would rather be by myself than sitting with the guest and talking. And there was this a reason for that, because I was born into a family where my father was a very dominant man, and he liked to impress his way of perceiving reality on everybody in the family. His way was the right way, and everything that was off that path was wrong. And I was often off that path. And well, it was they came from the Balkans in the mid 60s, and I was born in Sweden. So there were two cultures clashing there: a culture where women actually didn't have anything to say, and a culture where women's liberation is really had gone very far in the 60s. So my father kept this notion that women were not supposed to be educated, that women, well, they were best kept in the kitchen. And I was everything opposite to that. So there was always problems going on. And I realized that very early, that if I was to survive in this family, I had to keep my thoughts to myself. So that's why people thought I was an introvert, which I actually am not, because I'm sitting here talking to you on a podcast, and I'm talking all the time. I'm writing and coaching people, and so it's a wrong label, because that was not who I was. It was just how I expressed that. And I had this. I learned how to dodge fear instead of seek happiness in my childhood. Every time I dodged fear, I thought, oh, this is happiness. And it wasn't. I mean, it took me many years to understand that there are two different ways of being in this reality. One way is to dodge fear and think that that is happiness, and the other one is to actually, truly, actively seek happiness. And that's what I'm doing today.
And you talk a little bit about happiness and whatnot in your book. Do you believe that having that outlook when you were younger and trying to kind of be seen as an introvert is kind of looking at it in a negative way and trying to, well, obviously you couldn't confront your father at that time because that's how it was in society. Whereas if it was now, it's probably perceived more as an obstacle because, okay, in the modern era, well, I think this, you think that, we'll kind of come to a compromise. Okay, there might be an obstacle as to, okay, you are the parent, but I don't have the same view or outlook on life as you do, so you can't constrain my thinking to what you had to go through. And how I want to ask this question is, you bring up in the book about positivity. What do you mean that to be? Is it like a perception of reality, as into obviously not dwell on the past and not look too far in the future, because okay, you can't control, those are kind of the uncontrollables. You can't change what happened in the past, and okay, you can change the outlook in the future because it's what you do in the here and now. So is that what you kind of mean in terms of the positivity in your book?
Well, what I mean is that everything that happens in your life happens for a reason. And why I put myself, or my higher self put me in this horrible settings as I put myself in when I was a child, is because I needed that. I needed the silence. I needed to not express my thoughts, because if you express your thoughts and grown-ups tell you, no, 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 this is how it is, it will change your way of thinking. And I couldn't do that. I had to keep them to myself, which meant that it was only me, myself, and I in this conversation. And my thoughts didn't get polluted by grown-ups. So I could kind of grow my own thoughts and my view of reality without allowing others to tell me how it is. So looking at it from this perspective, where I am a happy person in a beautiful life, looking back at my childhood, the things that were horrible then were needed in order for me to be who I am today. So they were horrible then and felt like something negative, but looking from this perspective, I can see the point in them, and I can use the positive outcome of them in this reality now. And I do talk about that in the book too, that you actually can change your past by remembering things from a different perspective. There is a story where I tell how I felt when my parents wanted to take us to a cave nearby. And I was so happy to do this. I think I was 4 or 5 years old, and I remember the anticipation about going to this cave, and I had this imagination of how it would look and everything. And when we were to sit in the car, my mother said, there's no room for her, we're too many, there were many people going on this trip, and they decided that I was to stay at home. And this sounds like a very small thing, but to me it was a pattern, because my mother used to do this. She felt that I wasn't needed. She didn't want me in her life, and this actually showed itself in this memory I have. And I was very sad, because I felt that I'm not that big. I could fit into the car, but my mother doesn't want me. So I was sad, and they left off, and I was sitting there with my aunt, because my aunt stayed back with me. And what I did there, I created a little cave. I took pebbles around and I put them on top of each other, and I created an imaginary cave. And then my aunt and me, we started playing with that cave. She told me how it looked there, and we had this imaginary moment where we were actually in a cave. And I had this as a sad memory for a long time. But a few years ago, when I revisited this memory, I started looking at it from a different perspective. I started looking at this little girl, because I didn't allow myself to be devastated. I didn't run up to my room, started crying or something. I actually created something that would give me what I wanted. I wanted to see the cave, so I created my own cave, and then I went into this cave and I had a blast with my aunt. So that is important information for me. Not that I was a victim, that my mother actually didn't love me, but what I do with a negative thing in my reality, and I did it as a child, I turn it into an opportunity to experience what I want, even if the opportunity doesn't show up by itself. And that's important information for me today, because it shows me that I actually am a strong soul, and that I actually think that I can change my own reality. So looking at it from that perspective, a negative memory can become something really, really strong for you if you look for the strength in that moment. So I think we can change our past by changing the feeling that is attached to that memory, because every memory has a feeling attached to it, and the feeling is the key in the memory always. So if you can change your perspective on the feeling you had there and ask yourself, why am I feeling this? How did I cope with it? And then look at it from a positive perspective, you actually change your future, because when you understand something in the now moment, you also change your actions in the future. So that's how future and the past are connected. It's only through now. So when people say you can't change your past, of course you can't change the facts. I mean, the time of the day, who was there, but you can look at your own feelings and look at your actions and reactions from different perspectives, and that's when you can just pick the good stuff and release the less good things.
Okay, well, that's quite insightful in terms of using a negative. It's probably something. It's, like you say, you've had a negative connotation on something, but you've turned a positive spin on it. It's probably something I probably subconsciously probably done a lot throughout my life in terms of be it dealing with my impairment, school, university, sport, and whatnot, and kind of dealing with it. Okay, well, this is affected me in a negative way. What can I do to give it a positive connotation or a better outlook on it? If I look at, as an example, the sport, if I look at it from a negative perspective, okay, my goal throughout it was to get a gold medal. Okay, that didn't happen. But now when I have a positive reflection on that career in its whole entirety, is okay, I had a good career. I managed to go 10 years, go to 2 Paralympic Games. It's not any people say to me, oh, that's still the ones that when I've looked at it on a negative perspective have said, well, you've still made 2 games. It's still better than most people have made one. So I was like, it's kind of made me change my mindset of it. Okay, I didn't achieve that original goal I had, but it's not the end of the world. Was able to travel. Well, I've been to, I won't say every continent in the world, and uh, I've probably had lasting friendships that I still have to this day with multiple nationalities throughout the world. Whereas if I hadn't done sport, okay, I still had friendships because I grew up in a NATO environment, so I was among different cultures, nationalities. So from that aspect, okay, that wouldn't change because I still know different nationalities anyway. But being able to travel and compete in different countries, I wouldn't have been able to do. So I look at it more so from that. Okay, you've managed to see different countries that you. Well, if I use the Beijing Games as an example, uh, I hadn't been to China before it, and I haven't been back since. So, and if I put it in a perspective from my family, how they see it, if I hadn't competed at that games, they never would have gone to China. So it kind of, and it's okay. It's maybe because of how that state is, and that's okay. That's political, and that's something you're told never to bring up in terms of conversation. It will just cause arguments. So it could be from that standpoint that we've not gone, because from a cultural standpoint, it was a very educational country to go to. So would I go back to China? I don't know, maybe somewhere else, because what my family did, and it's a little bit off topic, was they obviously came to see me compete, but they did all the touristy things as well. So they went to Xi'an to see the Terracotta Warriors, and then went to see one of my family members who was at the time living in Shanghai before coming to Beijing. So they got to see a little bit more of the country, whereas all I saw was, well, Beijing and, well, the athlete village. So when people ask me, well, what's an athlete village like? Well, okay, they get from games to games have changed slightly, but I kind of put it in an analogy. I think somebody at university asked me this. I said, to put it in perspective, it's like university accommodation, but there's more security, and that was which is probably, it's to a certain extent okay. There's some true connotations to that, because obviously there's catering staff, cleaners. Okay, at university, well, there may be a university somewhere in the world that they make your bed, but I didn't happen to go to one of those universities. But they will clean your room, make your bed. So it's a bit like a big brother in terms of it's like a family away from home. It's like a parent almost, because well, beyond having that as a child, you won't get that any time in your life. So it's a weird thing, but it's like, okay, that's the norm. I've got that for 2 to 3 weeks. Everything's free, so it's the first game I came back from. You thinking, well, I've got to change my mindset because now I'm back in the real world and everything isn't free.
Well, you experienced something that you wouldn't be able to experience if it weren't exactly for how it worked for you. And you mentioned that you had a goal to get a gold medal, but it didn't happen. But then again, you looked at it from a different perspective as what you got from that experience, and that is actually what we're doing here. And that's why I I talk about life as not a journey, but as a dance, because when you put up too many goals in your life, it might feel that you're on your way to a goal all the time and you're not experiencing yourself in the now. You're going from one goal to another goal, and the journey becomes your life and not the experience of the journey. So sometimes I feel that setting too many goals and too far in the future actually brings you out of focus in the now. So I feel that what you're doing when you're retrospectively looking at your life, you see that that the dots are connected, even though you couldn't see it when you were there from the beginning. So you see why you needed to do this and why you needed to do that in order to be who you are today. And that's the only way you can perceive your own life as something linear, because otherwise it's always oozing here and there and asking yourself, okay, do I like this? Do I want this? Don't I want this? That's the only way to perceive life. But sometimes society doesn't allow us to do that. Society likes us to do everything in a linear way, and everything is going to be planned, and you work from 9 to 5 and then you come home and you do this and you have vacation, and everything is so planned. And I think that human beings, our true nature, actually don't need this kind of planning, because when you trust your reality and when you trust that your life will unfold exactly as it should, you kind of ooze, you dance through life. You don't make it a journey, you dance through it, because making it a journey can sometimes be very disappointing at the end of the journey, because it didn't turn out the way you expected it to turn out, because you were not conscious while you were doing it.
Well, that's definitely well. I think from an athlete perspective, it's very very much regimented in terms of, like you say, you've got well, if you put it in perspective from a 9 to 5, I say an athlete's lifestyle is probably even worse. It's because it's cycled in terms of 4 year plan into a year, into a month, into a week, and then obviously what you're going to do day to. So when people ask me, or if I use that when we were on training camp, for example, how did you get through a 2 week training camp? Well, okay, I've obviously got the plan for the whole duration that we're going to be training, and then I forget about it, and then I look at every well, how I kind of simplified it and look at each session as it came, because and then okay, there's one day done, that's done. I can't do anything about that. The training's done for that, and I didn't overcomplicate it ever. Okay, we get these big plans, and you can see how it's structured, but I never delved into it to say, well, this is the amount of training I'm going to do for 4 years or the whole year. I'll take it each day as it came, and then as things got closer, obviously, well, if I put Beijing into perspective for the Paralympic, for that, because it was my first games, people say, well, did you get excited? I was like, maybe, I think our teammates say it was 100 days ago. Yes, 100 days ago. It's still a long way away. And I'm trying to think of when did I actually get excited about. It was probably maybe maybe a week to 2 weeks before we were going to leave that it actually set home, okay, I'm going now. And now I'm getting, whereas before that, it's like, it's, well, 100 days is like almost 3 months. There's a lot can happen in 3 months. You could get hurt. Well, you're not. Well, you could in some cases get deselected and things like that. So a lot negatively could happen in that short space of time. So I was like, I was probably, to a certain extent, a little bit pessimistic as to, okay, I'm not. It's probably my demeanor and character to a certain extent. I Well, certain times I'll get emotional and excited about something, but most cases I'll play it down and it's not, it's not important. It's not important. It's come back to bite me sometimes in the sporting sense because I've been termed it's something you brought off air about laziness. It's perceived as I still kind of portray it sometimes to this day as I give this demeanor that I've got a lazy etiquette. I don't care. It's probably I've got well, in all honesty, I'm quite laid back. So I think one of the coaches used it quite a good analogy of it. I'm late. I couldn't be more laid back. Well, what was it? If I was more laid back, I'd be lying down. So it was. So I don't take things. I won't say it's it's put me at risk in times in performance sport because it's as if I don't care, but I do. It's kind of a weird one in terms of.
I think I think that what you're actually describing is it's more of trusting. You don't need to invoke fear in it because when you start to excite yourself, you're also invoking terms that you need to do something, you need to accomplish something, and it takes the edge of the joy of being there and doing it. So, in order to stay in a calm state and enjoy the joy of doing it, you need to lower the expectations and just trust the process. And that sometimes can be felt by others from the outside as laziness because you don't want to do things. Your body says, no, lay down and just do nothing because that's what you need to do right now. But as I say, society is always pressing back on us, telling us, you need to do this, you need to do that, this is how you should be doing it. Because we're conditioned not to trust ourselves. We are conditioned that the society outside of us, people, others, teachers, everybody else knows things that we need to learn. And it's not always that, because you're the one knowing your own body best. You know what feels good inside. And you know when you need to stop worrying, when you need to stop heightening the expectations. You know when you need to calm down. And that's what you do. And that can be perceived as laziness from the others because compared to the others that are up and running and doing stuff all the time, you might be perceived as lazy because you're not doing it. This is only your way of harnessing energy that you need later on. And that's how you do it. But people are so fast to label us lazy when we don't do it the way they want us to do it. So I feel that you are actually much more in tune with who you are, and that's why you know when to be laid back in a situation. And I feel that everybody should trust themselves more than what others tell them out from the outside, because maybe you don't need to train as others do. You don't need to do what others do. You will perform anyway. We're all unique, so what's good for you might not be good for me. I feel what's good for me. Of course, you should take advice from people but it's only an advice. It's not written in stone. You can do whatever you want with it, I feel.
Oh, but in terms of that kind of environment, it's probably it's that it what's the term that people it's the quote it's what's it I can't think lost my train of thought, but it's you've got to do it their way, or what was it it's my what was it the term, it's my way or it's the highway. So it's that one, it's you either conform or you're gone. So it's
Yes.
I think I brought it up when I've talked to ex-athletes in terms of that, when we talk about um, there's that perception. it's either, I think we talked about it a little bit, that it's either the media don't want to talk about that there's politics within sport, or people are like, oh no no no, it doesn't exist. It's like, yes, it does. It's how you handle that situation. In most cases, I've gone under the radar with it. It's like, well, I know it exists. I'll play it to my cards when I see fit. Okay, if I don't agree with something, I'll go probably back it if there's a majority, because if you're out there by yourself on an island, it's like, well, if you start fronting up to the, say, quote unquote, the man, well, you're gonna lose, because that's it's something you touched upon with ego. That person has an ego, you have an ego. There's going to be a little bit of fracas, and okay, he at the end of the day, say for example the CEO of that sport, somebody high up within sport, well, they've got all the power. Okay, you're fronting up to me, you're the athlete. Okay, I'm going to make it as hard as possible for you to ever get selected. So you're thinking, I've spoken to one athlete, he's in that sort of condition right now. You're thinking, well, talking to other athletes, it's like, well, by confronting them every single time on particular issue, you are right to do so, but I'm retired now, so I can say what I want, and there's no ramification. Whereas you're still competing and want to get to a higher level, you're just putting more and more barriers in front of you to have to hurdle. Whereas if you say, okay, I agree with where you're coming from in terms of, oh, this isn't right, this isn't right, this isn't right, but it's sometimes it's like, well, maybe let it lie to make things a little bit easier. But that's probably coming from my perspective. I've had other people in my corner fight those battles for me. I've had to just deal with the sport, and they'll deal with the political side of things. Okay, you're putting hurdles in play in my way. Say for example, I won't bring up what sport it was, but when it was other people getting other chances to take my place, but when it came to when it was my opportunity, and that was in my case, they were saying, no no no, that's it, that's the only trial we're gonna have. You're thinking, well, that's one situation for everybody else and one for me. So it's like, well, if it's that situation for them, it should be the same case for me. Not one rule for them, one rule for me. So I had somebody fight me, so it's like, well, they've had all this, and it was one off day, and I've, well, never performed as poorly as that before or after it. It was probably because it was, like you say, that expectation of getting to a Paralympics. I'd never achieved that. I think it was the stress of that made me perform so poorly. Okay, it could have been multiple other things as well, but I kind of put most of I won't say the blame, but the emotional state that I got myself into was because of that, and having that high expectation where I need to perform at this particular moment in time to get to where I want to. So, and then subsequent other competitions since, no problem. But it was coming back to that moment in time. I kind of used it as a motivator, and looking at putting a positive spin on it to help me make decisions later on in my career. So I had to move from where I was based at university to that central base before Beijing. I had to make a similar decision 4 years later with the London Paralympics. Okay, this time it was a little bit easier because I wasn't at university. So I was thinking, well, I've done this, it worked out, I'll do the same thing because this is what turned out. I'll put myself in a positive light to be able to achieve that goal. Okay, it may not happen, but I'll give myself the best opportunity to get there. Okay, it did work out, but I knew realistically I'll give myself a year full time in that sport, would have been 2010 to 2011. If it doesn't work out, because I deferred. I was going to do a postgrad that I deferred to the following year to give the sport the chance that it deserved. Okay, if it didn't work out, I had a university degree to come back to. In the end, I did them both, which was probably not a good idea because I was based for volleyball at that time in London, but at university in the north of the country, which is about 2 hours by train. And okay, it was twice a week, but I think if I reflect on it now, my studies probably suffered a little bit because obviously I've got to put in, well, off the top of my head, it's about 4 to 6 hours a day training, and if I'm being honest, that was the last thing I wanted to do at the end of the day was either write coursework, read, and especially at that level of education, it's a little bit harder than undergrad, and maybe in hindsight, having that gap year out between doing my undergraduate and doing my postgraduate was probably not the best idea because I'd kind of lost not lost sight of how I had to write papers, but I didn't have to be in that mindset for that year as a student. I could do whatever I want, to some degree, do whatever I wanted. When we weren't training, I could sleep, do things that aren't important like social media and things like that, and kind of do things that, well, in all honesty, are not important because it's only wasting a little bit of time of your day to some extent. Okay, you might find something useful on there, but majority of the time that's not the case. So that was probably a bad thing, but it probably made it's obviously an extra bow to the string to my bow. Sorry, in terms of okay, I did tertiary education and I progressed on. I did have this. Well, I won't say the silly notion, but I when I did start my postgraduate, I was like, oh yeah, I plan to go on and do a PhD, and I thought there's no chance. It's once I actually got to when would it been the end of that first year, I was like, nah, that's enough of education. It's hard enough at master's level, let alone going beyond that. I was like, nah, we'll call it a day of education. I had a good run. What would it be like? About 20 years of education from starting as a kindergarten. So I was like, yeah, that's enough. 20 years is long enough. And if I kind of bring it back to, obviously finishing high school, I was in two minds whether or not even to go to university because I was like, well, I don't think my grades are good. I won't say I would never say I was stupid, but I never applied myself fully in my education throughout it. I was a above average student. Okay, that my parents probably didn't like that because like I'd be happy with getting well, if you put it in perspective from the American system, because I did my last 4 years of high school in that system, I was on what did I finish with? About a B average. So I'm not. I'm still quite bright in the grand scheme of it, but I was quite happy to get B. Well, I say majority of them were probably Bs. I'd have look at my report, guys. A fair few A's, but I was quite happy to be in the middle of the road, and kind of it's probably come back to my character of being quite laid back. That's where I'm happy to be, and there's nothing gonna change.
It's yes, of course, because it's a part of your personality, and being laid back is about trusting that life will give you what you need when you need it. So that is what you're actually talking about. And I was thinking about the education and you talking about the grades and everything. I excelled at everything I did in school. And then I met my husband, and he asked me a question. He said, "Do you like what you do?" I was going, "What's there to like? I need an education." And that's actually to put it into a perspective for me, because what good is it if you excel at things that you actually don't want to do? And grades are actually only telling you how good you are at repeating what they tell you to repeat. So I was very good at repeating what they wanted me to repeat, but I had no clue what I wanted to do when I was 19 years old. I didn't know who I was, actually, because I have not had the time. I excelled in so many subjects in school. I was the best one ever, but I didn't know who I was, because I used all my effort to please my teachers and to be what they wanted me to be and to get these good grades, because they were a ticket into university, that I didn't even know what I wanted to study. And I think that the entire educational system needs to change in order for people like you and me and others to actually find out what life is all about, find out who we are and what we love to do. That's what the education system should be doing, not telling us who we are and boxing us in by putting grades on. You couldn't do this fast enough. So I mean, it's a question of how you look at the educational system. It's a question of how you look at grades. It's a question of understanding yourself in relationship to everything else around you in your reality. So education isn't everything. If you know who you are and you pursue your desires in reality, then what you need cannot be hidden from you. It has to come to you. That's a universal law. And sometimes it is harsh and hard, as you spoke about the limitations you have in the sports world. For instance, it's not always up to you if you can perform good or not. They are limitations, but still, you are doing exactly what you want to do at this moment in time and space. If you wouldn't have used, for instance, social media while you were on that train back and forth, you wouldn't be doing this podcast today, probably. Because you understand that social media is a way to express yourself, is a way to have a megaphone talking to much larger audience. So there is something in everything you do in your life. There is a purpose with everything that happens. So I think that actually when you look back at your life, it probably has been exactly as it should have been in order for you to be who you are at this moment.
Well, I probably put a positive spin on it probably at different points of my life, probably more so as an adult, that I've kind of, if I look at it from the sports perspective, people say, how did you manage to do so well in, what was it? Well, relatively well, if I look at it, in 3 different sports. I said, well, one, okay, I was probably fairly talented. I was definitely in the right place at the right time. It seemed to be every single time. Okay, I did have the notion that I was going to compete in Rio, and people have said to me in the lead up to it, "Oh, you should be competing. You're in good physical state to be there." I was like, "Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, but that is coming back to I'm in good physical state because of the business that I am now in, which is personal training, that I have to look the part to be able to say to people, you need to do X, Y, Z. Because if I wasn't in shape, somebody doesn't have that same, I won't say respect, but they won't listen to you because like, well, if you're not doing it, why should I? Whereas if I come back to that point I was going to make, they were saying I was in good physical condition to compete. Okay. Yes. Yeah, I'm physically able to because I'm not. I'm still. Yeah, I probably could still done even Tokyo, if I put my mind to it, it was the desire. I probably lost the desire to want to well, drive my body into the ground day in day out. I I still a little bit of a masochist to a certain extent because I still do it at a domestic level. I will, as I think my mom terms it very, very well, it's self-inflicted when I get injuries and things like that from training. It's like, well, I had the luxury when I was at elite level, I'm paid to do it, so it's a job. Now it's a hobby, so everything that you do to yourself is self-inflicted. So I can see where she's saying from that. It's your choice to still do sport now. Nobody's, I won't say it. Well, I never had anybody ever force me to do something I didn't want to do in terms of sport. So that one is kind of not a good example. But
circumstances can force you. It doesn't have to be a person. I mean, the circumstances can sometimes force you to do things.
oh no, I enjoyed. I won't say all the 10 years, but there were certain aspects of it that I okay. The traveling was nice. Competing in different countries. There's certain aspects of training I do miss. Most of them I don't. And when I say to kids um, to kind of reflect on it, what was I going to say? As to why you do sport or do anything in life for so long a period, is to kind of come back to it when you were a child. Is why did you first start doing something? Is obviously because you enjoyed it, you love it. It's you do that. That's why. Okay, they're lucky that they're getting paid to do it as an adult, but they still enjoy what they're doing. It's when I say it was time for me to stop at that level is probably coming back to that mindset is mentally I didn't want to do it anymore, and that's time to stop. It's no point because people said, oh, you could still do it. Yeah, but I don't I'd rather stop now than okay possibly make another games, do poorly, and think, well, if I'd have put a little bit more effort in over these past X amount of years, where would I have been? And that's something I didn't want to have to do because it's like, well, I can't. I've done all. I won't say done this training at half-assed, but not done it at 100%. And if I had done, what would be the outcome? I can't change any of that now, and it's kind of you're dwelling on something you can't now control. So it's like, well, it's better that okay. There's probably other factors that made me come to that decision, but it's like no, I just meant as people said, have you kind of given up? It's like, well, no, it's the mental aspect of it. It's you're not going to do something half. It was no point doing, from my opinion, there's no point doing something half-ass at all. It's you either put everything into it or you don't do it at all, and then obviously as you get older, injuries mount up at that level. Obviously, you're going to get sickness and injury. Well, not injuries, but ailments failing because that's just your body's starting to degrade. It's just there's nothing you can do about it. Okay, I think sports brings that about a little bit more quickly because it's nothing. It's not. It wasn't designed to be to be brutalized like it is. And I think from that's the point you raised off air in terms of the disability. I think it's probably in some cases. What was the word I'm looking for? Makes the impairment. Oh, what's the word I'm looking for? Come about more quickly. That because due to the nature that I've got scoliosis of the spine. What else have I got? But that's obviously as a condition, it's not ideal for anybody. But the negative connotations of it, I probably make worse. And obviously, because I have a prosthetic leg, I'm going to have a weaker back anyway. But I think because of how brutal sport was on my body, I think it's, in some cases, if I don't exercise, I see it more, that it's increased the severity of it,
Mm.
the condition more so than if I hadn't done it. But then on the flip side of that, I was very, very fit, so it kind of counterbalances it. You get the effects from exercise, but it also makes conditions worse. So
Mm.
it might made the condition come about more quickly. So it's because how I see it, probably as an probably a older gentleman, I'll probably be in a wheelchair, but that's something I've not come to terms with now more recently, but over the years, I think, well, that I know that's going to be possibly my outlook on life, and that's what it's going to be. Okay, if I stay fitter, that may not happen. That may not be the case, but we'll do everything in my part. So it's kind of one of those things. It's a catch-22. The sport has probably made that possibly happen sooner, but we'll have to wait and see.
Yes, I do understand what you're at, because you have to weigh things against each other. Your desires to accomplish certain things and your condition that might be an obstacle in that. At the same time, I feel that, I mean, as long as you're doing what you love to do, and obviously you must have loved to do something with your body. You must have felt the joy when your body was strong and you can do stuff. And in a way to actually show others that anything can be done, because that's what this uh, ability to do what you have done is showing others. That's why kids come up to you and ask you questions about you, because you're different than others, and still you are doing things that even, I mean, totally functioning men cannot do. So you're stretching your boundaries, and that is, I think, what your life actually is all about: stretching the boundaries, checking where are the boundaries, and then pushing them a bit just to see where they stop, and then you try something else. And I think that's how one should look at one's life, actually, to acknowledge that the limitations one have put on themselves, and then to use these limitations in order to make it a bigger place, a bigger space to be in. And that's the joy of doing that. So I feel that, I think that everybody, anyone you pick out on the street and ask them that question, they would probably describe their limitations in life and how they are trying to push them. But they're not aware of it. They call it something else. They call it obstacles. They call it problems. They call it something negative. But it actually isn't anything negative. It's just the way life works, the pushing of boundaries and limitations. That's what we're here to do. We're here to try these limitations and to just change them into freedoms. The joy of doing that. So that's what we're doing here.
Well, like you say, with limitations, I'd say maybe a little bit later in life, but it's coming to things where it's like, well, I don't really need to do that, so that's not really, in my eyes, that's not really a limitation. Whereas as a child, or if I bring into terms like on the playground, if I bring this analogy in, that I think my parents said to me, or I don't know how old I would have been, probably early primary school, elementary school. Obviously, if I'd see the other kids playing on the monkey bars, and well, the first day I obviously couldn't do it, but I'd be there sitting on the side, working it out. Well, okay, how can I do this that I'm able to do it? And I think they said to me, within probably about 2 to 3 days, I'd be doing it as well. And it's something through the later years, I've obviously looked at kids doing things. I think the other one would be running up the slide the wrong way, which is in this day and age is not very health and safe, not very good for health and safety. But it's one of those things that kids like to test the boundaries. Okay, well, what worst case scenario could happen? Okay, wasn't that big a slide? Is I don't know, friction burns, holes in clothes, and things like that. So it was seeing them how they do it and how can I adapt this that I can do it, because obviously with the prosthetic leg, I haven't got no control over any muscle function to be able to generate power to go up a slide, whereas I've only got one. How can I do it? And then I I I, I think this was probably like late elementary school and like primary, so I was be about 12, so I'd be a little bit bigger than I was when I was on the monkey bar. So I'm a little bit more developed in terms of musculature and things like that. And then kind of using when we go into secondary school and high school, I probably used by this time my upper body strength, which is probably, I won't say twice as strong as somebody. Probably it's probably somewhere in that ballpark at that age, using it as in my advantage for upper body things. So the American system has for their PE, they've got like a presidential award, and they've got certain physical tests that you have to do, and there's like parameters to, I think, well, to get the actual award, you'd have to be across the board, but uh, well, obviously due to my disability, some of those are unrealistic. Obviously, bleep test for one, I can do it, but I won't be able to get very far in it. But the one I excelled in was the pull-ups. So I was like, I asked our teacher, what's the top one for the actual awards? Okay, I think it was, I can't remember off the top. I think it was 12 or something like that, but I don't know if that's correct. Somebody would probably have to quote me on that and say what it actually is. It could have gone up. It could have gone up since I've left high school, or what is it now? About 12 years ago now. So it could have gone up, could have gone down. Um, in terms of, obviously, I wouldn't be surprised if it's gone down because people aren't as active as they used to be.
Yes.
But I said to the teacher, "Well, what is it?" And kind of talking to the other students. Oh, should I go for it? Should I not? Somebody got close. Because I was like, nah, I can't really be bothered because it's not a lot. I think we had to do. I was kind of looking at the average, just thinking, well, I can beat most of that, so I'll do that. And I think, why not? Why not? And I did. I can't remember how many I got in the end. I think it was in the 20s, and people say, "Oh, how did you manage to do that?" Well, this is my in my eyes is a forte one of my forte, because I'm using my strength to my advantage, and it's kind of going towards when we got into the sport at the high level. It came, well, I think it came back to bite me in the ass. I think one year, because our strength and conditioning coach said to me, because I was kind of just coasting a little bit in terms of training and just doing enough to be stronger than the rest of the team, which was, in all honesty, not very difficult. And I think I was working maybe at 60-70% of what I was actually capable of. So she took me aside and said, "Well, there's no point you just being, well, to term quote unquote, technically it'd be mediocre, as because you're not actually getting anything out of the session because you're just going through the motions and you're not really testing yourself." So I was like, that's fair, and that's a fair enough reflection, because by me just being mediocre and going through the motions, it's a bit pointless the session. So it kind of flipped it on the head. Okay, I'll take that criticism on board and I'll apply myself a little bit more. And I think the subsequent sessions after that, it got a little bit more competitive between the top three of us in the squad in terms of strength. Because how much does he weigh? He's about 100 kilos, one of the stronger ones, and I'm about 70 kilos, and we were doing a bench press exercise,
Mm.
and he dropped out before me because he couldn't. Well, in theory, he couldn't do any more. I think he's like, "Ah, James won't be able to go anymore." It's like, so the coach asked me, "Do you want to go up?" Yeah, I know I've got a little bit more, and I did it, and he came back in. So it kind of brought that competitive element to get the best out of him. So he's pushing himself now beyond the boundaries because he doesn't want me to beat him because I weigh less and I'm smaller.
Well, that was actually what I was talking about, the boundaries, trying to push the boundaries, because the boundaries are there just in order for us to push them somewhere. Otherwise, they wouldn't be there. So for you, for instance, when you were talking about the poor performance, when you had the negative mindset, you talked about it a while ago. Actually, what that is your reality showing you how much mind can do and what your mind actually is. So it's a valuable experience in your reality, even though it was a negative experience for you there. I mean, you lost and you didn't do what you wanted to do, and you felt like a failure probably afterwards. But it doesn't matter, because what you take out of that memory is that it showed you by example or by experience what your mind is capable of doing. And the same thing with the story here, where you push yourself into more and more and more because you want to experience how it is to feel it 100% in your body. And it could be a negative experience, but it actually gives you a positive connotation to it, because it shows you how much your mind is doing for your body, how much your body is dependent on your mind, actually. And I think that the entire reality, the way we are creating it for ourselves, is very, very much dependent on our mind and how we perceive reality, or how we choose to see it. It's like putting on glasses. When you're in a negative state of mind, you won't see everything you need to see in your reality, because your frequency will shut you down, and you will see only in the range of, well, the negativity or the fear or the worry or whatever the negativity might be. And as soon as you start relaxing, as soon as you start having fun, or doing something with joy, or follow your passions, you open up and your frequency heightens, which means that you take in more of your reality, which means that you see the possibilities in your reality. And that's how you push your boundaries, actually. So it's always about the retracting and extracting, or the change in the boundaries. That is what actually makes you feel alive. Because if it would be still, you wouldn't feel alive. So, yeah.
And then the last point I'm gonna ask before we wrap it up is, you asked me off air what was my take on disability and why I use that word in my
Yes.
website. So if you could,
Yes, I wanted to ask you that, because when I went to your website, the word that really stood out for me was disable, and it really got me going, because I love to play with words, and I started wondering, what does that word actually mean? Not being able to do what? I mean, I know a lot of men that cannot do what you are doing. So for me, it's like looking at Superman, and he says, "I'm disabled," and I don't get it. What is the word? What does that word actually mean? For me, it would be to say um, differently abled, because you can do things in a different way than maybe average people are doing. But then again, we have to start talking about what is average, what is the norm. And if you look at it from a higher perspective, you would see that every single being is unique. So there is no such thing actually as norm. And something that is not within the range of norm would be disabled. So for me, that word is very, very strange. And I just wanted to ask you how you feel about that. I mean, the word disabled.
I don't know. It's something that we discussed off air a little bit in terms of it's probably trying to conform within certain parameters that society looks upon it, because obviously with the society becoming more PC, the other words that would describe different ailments of disability are frowned upon. So it's probably that word is acceptable, but I kind of touched upon it with you that I would never let that word define who I am, because I don't. I wouldn't say I was disabled because, like you said, I've done a lot of things most people would say were for them are unattainable. So it's a case of I don't know. It comes down to it. What would it? Okay, I do. In terms of having a missing limb, it's not there. That would be my, how would I put it? It's like you say, you don't like the word disability, but that is the well, impairment's not really. It's not really an impairment. It's if you look, it's kind of like you say, words. You kind of using it to define something, and then you could manipulate it into whatever way
Well,
you want to.
yes, because when you use a word, you actually you manifest it in this reality, and the meaning you put in this word is going to no, I have to put it in a different way. Words are physical manifestations in this reality. When you label something, you put it in a box, and that box becomes the reality. But it's only a box. You can change stuff, and everything is that exists in relationship to something else, which means that a word like disable must be compared to something. So what are we comparing to? Well, we're comparing to something that we call norm. So what is norm? And when you start doing that, words actually lose their meaning. They lose their meaning. So I feel that every word that is showing that there is something missing is not correct, and that's why I felt that so strongly when I read the word disable on your site, because being able is to be able to do stuff, and you are able to do many things which others are not able. So why would you put this in front of it? That's a very strange thing for me to look at, and I do understand why, because when you compare it to the norm, it looks that way. But then again, what is the norm? Are we not unique, every one of us? We are. I would say that I am disabled to do what you're doing. I would never be able to do what you're doing. So
Well,
why not?
it's one of those in terms of you probably I don't know within look well physical characteristics. In some cases, some people could. It's just the mental. It's come back to the mind. They mentally don't want to. They
Yes.
don't either. They don't think they can. They possibly don't even want to fathom and go down they're not sporty at all. So that one was that would be another subcategory. Or obviously when I touched upon with the physical attributes, okay, if you're I don't know 5'3", you're not obviously going to be able to do be very successful in some circumstances in
Basketball, for instance.
basketball, the sports where you have to be
Yeah.
tall. Okay, you're not going to, in theory, succeed there. So that would be as an able-bodied person, that would probably be their argument. Okay, those are valid points. When it comes to probably
But if I mean, I'm 5'3" or something, 4. I don't even know how tall I am. I would, if I would want to be a basketball elite person, I would have to put disabled in my term, because I am disabled to do that. I cannot do that because my height is not that. So what I'm saying is the word disabled is always in relationship to something else.
should
And that's why
should it be the term then? Well, like you said, it's a limitation, really. But
Yes.
then it's probably harps back to the media then, because they obviously say disabilities. It's what one I was in the well in my office, and my mum had the television on, and they were talking about obviously the Russians with the doping scandal for the last 5 years, and the gentleman that was doing the conference said they've done this for 5 years over was it the summer, winter, and Paralympic Games. Well, last I knew, they're different organisations,
Mm-hmm.
but the Olympic and Paralympic both have a summer games and winter games. So that those
Mm-hmm.
two, so you're thinking, why are you making a third tier
Mm-hmm.
when it doesn't? Well, it does exist, but it doesn't. So you're thinking, well, there's a summer games, there's a winter games for the Olympics, okay. So
And then you have,
why didn't
yes.
you just put there was these circumstances that they did doping in the Olympic and Paralympic, and that's done.
Mm.
And most people that follow sport know there's a summer and there's a winter games. So
Mm.
I was thinking, and that was just listening in this room, thinking
Mm.
why? Well, and the research I looked at, it was less apparent in the Paralympic sports. So you're thinking,
Mm.
well, you can't group those together because it's not as apparent. Well, it's probably it's like another topic, but I believe the IOC probably missed a beat. They were to not ban the whole thing because I think there was probably some political things in that and money involved that they didn't ban. Whereas the Paralympic one went, no, this is what we're going to do. The whole, even if you're clean, doesn't matter. It was state doping. They knew that what they were doing. It's going to be effective. Okay, some athletes have said to me that was too harsh. It's like, well, really? I don't think so. I think that's life. That's a consequence. That's a consequence. Okay, you are a victim as a result, but if you look at to kind of simplify that, somebody's a victim in anything. So it's like, well, you might have not done anything wrong, but that's life. It's there has to be that's a consequence. Somebody's done something wrong. That's the consequence. You might not have done it, but that is the letter of the law. If you cheat as an individual, that is the judgment. Well, in theory, I think they're too lenient. Too lenient. If you've tested positive for something, you should be banned, and that's it. You're done. But that was well, that doesn't exist anymore. That was our stance in the UK. If you tested positive for anything, you were done. That was your sport career finished. Be it if you did it by accident or did it on purpose. But they had to kind of back down because the rest of the world wouldn't conform to that. You're thinking, well, if you want clean sport, that was one way of doing it. I think Britain was willing to go down to, if you did test positive, it was I think it was either a 2 or 4 year ban, but it used to be here. It used to be a lifetime ban. So it's like, well, that's a compromise, but then they still wouldn't do it. So you're thinking, well, that would help clean it up to a certain extent. I think it was 4 years because then if you did test positive in the Olympics, but you wouldn't be able to compete at the next one. So whereas the other countries didn't go with that, so I think they missed a beat in terms of that. But that's another story.
That's another story, yes, because I mean, I'm not into that kind of things, especially, but I feel that if you're in a game, you should follow the rules of that game because it is a game.
Oh,
It's not
there's
about.
some grey areas in sport. You will test that, like you said, testing the boundaries. People push them fine. There's fine margins between uh, well, I wouldn't say fair play and cheating, but
Yes.
you'll push the boundaries in sport as to what you can get away with.
I
And
know, I know. I always dream of people being honest when they're connected to their source, that they're honest and that they wouldn't cheat. So maybe that's a naive way of looking at it, but of course not. Of course, there's too much at stake, and sometimes there's money at stake. So there are a lot of factors in it that I wouldn't dare to go into and explore here.
It's just one of those things. It's probably harks back to it. Everything in life, be it good or bad, revolves around money.
Well, in this physical reality, it probably seems that way, but it doesn't have to be that way. Of course, we need money to survive, and we need money to buy things and to share stuff with others, and even to give joy to other people. But it's not all. I mean, you can have loads of money and be unhappy. So it's kind of important to know who you are and seek the happiness from within, and then the rest will just follow as it should, synchronistically and in time and space at the right place.
So Gordana, to wrap up the podcast in like a little brief note, what would be your tip be to help somebody improve their day-to-day life?
I would say that actively seeking joy in everything you meet, even the bad things in your life, always trying to tweak everything you encounter to see, is there a positive side? Because this universe actually contains pluses and minuses in equal amount. So it's up to you to look at everything that comes to you. If it comes as a negative thing, try to tweak it a bit to see if there is a positive spin on it, and seek happiness actively in every single moment, the small moments in your life, even when just looking at the trees or enjoying a sunset. Just be present and be grateful for what you're receiving, and try to find the positive side of everything. And I think that's a very easy way to start knowing yourself, because you are there somewhere in the joy. You will find yourself.
Okay. And then the final point to take home, if somebody had a question to ask you at a later date, what would be the best form of social media to get in contact with you?
Oh, that would be Twitter. I'm at My Power Talk on Twitter, but they can also send me messages via my site, which is mypowertalk.com. But if they want to have direct connection with me, Twitter is always the best. So at My Power Talk on Twitter.
Okay then. So thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedule and coming on the show.
Thank you so much, James, for having me. I've enjoyed our conversation very much.
So for everybody listening, this podcast will be aired every Thursday. So until next week, I will see you then.